So I quite often get questioned about what resources are good to have if you're going to do casework, if you're going to take on councils and get decisions overturned. So I'm just going to do a video now. Literally, I'm going to go through some of the resources I've got. In fact, all of them I've got. They just sit on my desk, basically, some of which I kind of refer to a lot, some that are kind of there for a rainy day. And I'll also go through how much they cost, because one of them in particular is very expensive, but I would say it's worth the effort. So basically, starting with the Homelessness Code of Guidance. This is something we give out to delegates of our training for free, or this version at least. It's an abridged version. It kind of cuts out some of the chapters which really you're not going to need to know. So there's kind of chapters about homelessness strategies and stuff like that, which are not going to come up in casework. Just to point out that you can get that for free on the internet. So if you just literally Google Homelessness Code of Guidance PDF, it'll be the first thing that comes up. I would say it is very much worth your while to print it out, bind it, and then literally just scribble all over it and put post-its on it, because there's a chapter for kind of all the important concepts. There's a chapter on priority need, a chapter on local connection, and so on. And it's really kind of written in that accessible language. So it is kind of the kind of go-to document. The thing is, there are going to be cases you come up against which it's not quite clear enough. So although it probably covers 95% of the kind of questions you're going to have about homelessness law, there are going to be those occasions where you need to go quite a lot deeper if you're going to get those good outcomes. Which brings me to housing allocations and homelessness. Now, this is the really expensive one. It's about 140 quid. It's by Jan Luber. And basically, it's an absolute tome. It's like 1,600 pages, 1,500 pages. But it is really well set up. So basically, there's kind of the initial bits, a kind of list of the cases that are referred to and the kind of reference points that you can go find them. There's a section on housing allocation, and then there's basically a whole load on homelessness law. So it kind of bounces off the code of guidance. So if the code of guidance has kind of got something to say about something, this book will go into a lot more detail. So most recently I used it because I was trying to find out when a council should consider a couple to be a part of the same household, and where it'd be reasonable for them to be expected to live together, because it's kind of a bit of a grey area. That textbook kind of gave me the answer. Wasn't the answer I wanted, actually, but it gives me the answer about how that should be considered. And there's plenty of other kind of examples of when I've kind of found the answer in that textbook and its predecessors. The reason it's so expensive is partly because it is a hell of a lot of work that goes into it. But the other thing to say is that it is important, I would say, in this case, that you get the most recent edition. So that's the 6th edition, came out a couple of months ago. But you can get cheaper versions of it. The only problem is, of course, is that if you're relying on an argument to be made, and the law's changed since that textbook was written, you're going to end up kind of losing the argument. So for that reason, it is good to have the most recent edition of that book. So these are all, that's LexisNexis. So I'll put a link on the video as to where you can get that from. You can get it from Amazon as well, but if you can avoid it, it'd be good to, I guess. Next one I'm going to talk about is the Housing Law Casebook by Legal Action Group. Or published by Legal Action Group. This is the 7th edition. Again, this is something it's worth having a reasonably recent edition. Like, it's probably not quite as important as with the housing allocations and homelessness. But essentially, you've got all areas of housing law covered here. And I'll just try and work out exactly how much of this book is on homelessness. So something like this section here is just about homelessness law. So there's lots of other stuff about tenancies and stuff like that, which is all good. But essentially, again, it's really well laid out. And if you're looking for a kind of a precedent of how the law should work in a particular situation, you can often find something very similar. So again, reason I kind of most recently went into this one, I was looking at priority need and how vulnerability to sexual exploitation would kind of make someone in priority need, and was able to find a good answer in that. So again, it's expensive. I actually don't know how much this one is at the moment, but with that one, you could probably go back an edition or two and still have a really good. So certainly you kind of have the kind of standard cases explained. Just to kind of explain what it actually is, it's just basically a series of summaries of case law. So generally speaking, you've got a page or half a page on each case, sometimes shorter if it's a very simple one. And they'll often kind of cross-reference each other as well. So it's kind of really well referenced in that respect. So you can kind of navigate it pretty well. But again, just worth getting and scribbling all over, because again, certainly the way I learn, I find it easier to learn what the law is by looking at when council's got it wrong and when council's got it right. because you can kind of work out where that threshold is that way, rather than just kind of reading the Homelessness Code of Guidance or something like that. So the cases make it, I guess, more real. So those, well, certainly the first two I would say are essential. The Code of Guidance is certainly essential. There are some other free documents you can get, which I haven't actually brought with me today, but you can get them online, particularly the local government ombudsman's reports. So there's a focus report on homelessness. I can't actually remember the name of the title of it, but I know if you Google local government ombudsman focus report gatekeeping, it will come up then. So it's most recently updated in 2015. When it came out in 2011, that was like the first document I ever read, which I kind of opened my eyes to the fact that homelessness law actually exists. So that is well worth a read, even if you just read the case studies in them. But I'd say read, kind of the other relevant chapters as well. The LGO also did a report last November 2021, about domestic abuse. And again, that is essential reading, because that is another resource you can quote when you're going to council. So one of my favorite quotes from it is the fact that it says local authorities default position should be to believe people who are victims of domestic abuse. That is a very, very cool thing to kind of go in with when you're working with someone who actually, for various reasons, hasn't reported something to the police. So again, the LGO, it's not law, but it's very, very influential in how council should work, because it's their job to effectively adjudicate whether a council's followed the law or not. So councils respect the LGO. So there's some ones specifically about homelessness, but I've got some other ones which I'd say are really kind of cool to have. The first one I look at, and this is not in any particular order, is Professor Luke Clements, Clustered Injustice and the Level Green. This isn't really about what the law says, but this is about how the law works and how the law doesn't work. It's only about 120 pages of text. It might just be the best book I've ever read in terms of how powerful and how punchy it is. And it kind of makes just, every page is filled with really, really kind of clear advice and real kind of clear diagnosis of the current system. So it says things like, an advice service needs to have its most experienced professionals on the front line. It's no good kind of locking them away in a cupboard and kind of, protecting them from the members of the public. They need to be the first person that the member of the public speaks to, because of their experience and their knowledge. They're going to be the ones who actually probably know the route out of it fastest, rather than kind of going through lots of inexperienced staff. It talks about kind of, having that experience out on the shelf. So, and that's one of hundreds of kind of really cool things it talks about. But yeah, it's really refreshing. If you've worked in the sector for any length of time and it's kind of, you're wearied by it, it's just really refreshing to hear a professor of law talking about, the importance of the law being followed, and how, the bureaucracy of councils often kind of stop it actually being effective. So incredible book. If I had, the time to do it, I would really be looking at kind of almost like working through the book and, creating a service based on those principles, because I think they're so spot on and so kind of clever how he expresses it all. So that's Clustered Injustice. Before I go on, I just forgot to mention, it'd be really help me out if you subscribe to this channel, because we are not too far away from being able to earn some money from it for Just Us, the charity I work for. So yeah, the score. There's a little subscribe button down there. If you, or there, or whatever, if you just kind of click on that, just helps us out basically. We get enough views as it is, but it'd be good to kind of get the subscriptions up so we can start making a bit of cash. Next up, I've got the BNF, which is the British National Formulary. This book you can pick up for pennies on Amazon, because you can basically get an out-of-date version of it. We're not prescribers, we don't care whether it's like the latest thing. But what this is basically, it's an encyclopedia of different medications. And it goes into quite a lot of detail. So it kind of go into like what dose means what, and what the kind of contraindications and stuff like that. The reason I've got this is because I will quite often meet people who have been in the mental health sector for a long time, and they actually don't know what their diagnoses are, because they've been told different ones at different times. And actually lots of psychiatrists don't even bother to really tell them what their diagnosis is. But that essentially means that you can take details about someone's medication. So let's say olanzapine, 7.5 milligrams a day, and you can work back from that. So you can say, okay, right, olanzapine, 7.5 milligrams a day, that would indicate psychotic episodes or whatever, and it's been used as an antipsychotic. So, you can kind of find out a lot without having to go to a psychiatrist and waiting for them to respond to your requests for information. Because in one sense, unless a doctor's got a very good reason to, they should be sticking to the BNF. So as I say, get an old version of it. That one was 2014. I'm sure you can probably get one more recent than that for not a lot of money, but well worth it. Lots of times I've kind of been able to use that. Again, when you're kind of in that kind of rush of you've just met someone and you're trying to establish some facts about, what diagnosis they might have when you're making that argument about priority needs first off. So really cool book to have. Next up, I've got Data Protection by Peter Carey. This is not the most recent edition. Interestingly, I just checked on Amazon and you can't actually get this version. So the most recent version is effectively the cheapest one to get. So the most recent one looks like that. I prefer this one because it's thinner and easier to handle. This is the one I've scribbled all over. The reason I'm kind of talking about data protection within homelessness is that, and I've said it elsewhere, data protection is the key to changing the sector. If the sector, and when I say the sector, I mean if councils and charities followed data protection law, it would immediately mean that they were delivering genuinely person-centered support to their people using the services, and those people who are using the services can use data protection law to hold those organisations to account. So I've said it elsewhere loads of times. There's a huge power balance in the sector in terms of professionals and people accessing the services, and that power often gets abused in various ways, either deliberately or kind of just through incompetency or whatever. Data protection law holds the key to challenging those organisations, because it is impossible to do a good job in the sector without following data protection law. So, part of casework is often going to be making subject access requests and getting hold of people's records. And potentially you can use those times where organisations have breached the law as a bit of a, kind of adds weight to the complaint, so it gets taken more seriously. So, I think the most recent version is 50 quid. If you can pick up that older version, which was, I think, the 5th edition. That was the 5th edition. The most recent is the 6th, I think. But if you can pick up the older one, I don't know that the law's changed that much since the new editions come out. So, I would get it. And again, you don't have to read all of it, but just those chapters about, how special category data should be processed, those kind of things can be really helpful. Next up is the ICD-10, which I keep getting told they're about to release the ICD-11, but I've seen no sign of it yet. This is the instruction manual for psychiatrists. That's probably not the way of saying it. Basically, it is a description of all the different diagnoses you're going to find within the mental health world. The reason it's good to have that book is that, again, I dealt with someone who's most recent time I've dived into it. They had a diagnosis of adjustment disorder, and I wasn't even sure what that meant. You can basically go and find out what that means, because for every diagnosis there should be like a kind of set of criteria that are met. With adjustment disorder, it's the fact that they kind of experienced some kind of serious incident in their life and they're kind of still affected by it, which is then going to be relevant for priority needs. So there's a whole loads of stuff about substance misuse and substance dependency and stuff like that as well in there. So it's a really cool book, interesting as well. If you've got that kind of brain that takes in information, just to really understand how psychiatry views mental health issues and kind of views the human mind. Because it's helpful to understand that, because it's not like it's the ultimate truth, but it's helpful. And ultimately, when you're making those arguments for priority needs, that's essentially the rule book we have at the moment. I'm sure it could be improved in various ways, but that's what we've got. So and you can, I'm sure you can get a free version of it just on PDF. So I think that's about, you can probably get a copy of that for 15 quid or so. But if you want to kind of get the PDF, I'm sure you can get it for free if you just Google it. Nearly there. Next book I've got is Tim Spencer Lane's Care Act manual. They're probably, in fact, I know there are some other kind of textbooks on the Care Act. The reason I'm including this in the homelessness video is that if you're working with adults who are homeless, it is very likely they have some level of care and support need, which doesn't necessarily mean that they're going to have eligible needs and therefore can access additional services from a council, but it's going to be relevant around safeguarding, if nothing else. And so that's one of many probably resources you can get. where it talks about section 42, which is the safeguarding section of the Care Act, in a lot of detail. You know, and again, you can't do good homelessness practice without you know regularly making safeguarding alerts, because there's so much abuse going around. That gives you the criteria you'll need to satisfy, and it explains what happens when someone meets those criteria within section 42. So really good book. There's obviously other kind of sections in there as well, like section 9. It kind of talks about how people have a right to have an assessment for care and support needs if they just approach a council. So there's other things as well. But for me, if nothing else, just understanding how safeguarding should work is really kind of cool and really helpful to actually get people housed who are at risk of abuse. And then finally, I couldn't find this on Amazon. I could find it, but I couldn't find it for sale. So it's the Mental Capacity Code of Practice. Again, this is, if it hasn't already, it's been rehashed, it's been updated. Chapter 4 is, and again, I'm sure you can get it in PDF online. Chapter 4 about mental capacity is really useful. Lots of people who work in the sector don't realise that anyone can assess mental capacity if certain conditions are met. So, you know, if you work with someone who's either very, you know, intoxicated a lot of the time, or they are subject to some pretty significant mental health issues, you can work out how you can assess their capacity to make certain decisions at certain points. So, yeah, really good book to have. And it also just kind of is helpful. There's chapter 4 is really cool as well, because it talks about things like eating disorders and substance misuse issues, which are often seen by some members of the public as being like lifestyle choices, including housing officers, sadly. And so it kind of gives you some kind of understanding around how you can challenge those kind of things. I've talked about it elsewhere as well. When our local council dismissed someone's risk of relapse as just a lifestyle choice, I've complained about it, and I went to town and I used a lot of the code of practice to inform the complaint about how substance use should be viewed by professionals. So it's a cool book. So yeah, that's it. There are plenty of other resources out there which are really cool, I'm sure, but those are the ones that I refer to the most. So yeah, I would say certainly get the first couple I talked about. If nothing else, get a code of guidance, because it's difficult to do anything without that. And as I say, it's written in such kind of accessible terms that you can kind of very quickly pick up on some important points of the law. So yeah, hopefully the video is helpful. Again, please subscribe, just helps me out. And hopefully we're going to get that 1,000 subscriber threshold at some point, so we can start earning a bit of money for the charity. So yeah, cool. I will see you in the next video.